Hi friends, it's Derek here. I was talking to famous people, and I'm making this video today as somewhat of a critique of the negative rights framework and libertarianism that I normally make, having been thinking about it because of Hami and Zach both mentioning that, hi Kitty, that they, yes, that's your butthole. Okay, so they both mentioned that they've been quote-unquote questioning their libertarian beliefs, which I wholly encourage. I heard myself saying that on the video, and then I thought, well, why don't you do some questioning as well, Eric? So, that's what I'm here to do today. The first thing I point out is I think we inadequately distinguish between what I would call metaphysical crimes and physical crimes. So, for stuff that happens in the physical world to objects done by agents, for the most obvious rights violations, it's pretty straightforward stuff, you know? There's not a lot of dispute about it, and to the extent that there is dispute about it, it's going to be more about... Kitty, god damn it. Stop, Kitty. Yeah. Stop. Okay, it's going to be more about... Kitty, for those who... Oh my god, come here, Kitty, or go away or something. For those who commit murder or assaults, we might argue about how much they ought to be punished, but not whether, usually. And we might argue about how many of their rights get forfeit, but not if some of their rights get forfeit. With metaphysical crimes, we have a much different and a much more squishy kind of reality. We do have plenty of metaphysical crimes, like fraud, that is built upon the notion of a criminal deceit of another. And it stems from the reality that claims come with a burden. Making claims comes with a burden. So, and that there's a just and fair, is a capacity of individuals to adjudicate a fair and just outcome based upon the burdens that one takes on when one makes claims. So, when somebody, for example, defrauds another person, uses deceit to cause them to make a bad business decision that profits themselves and harms the other person. In that case, in order to prove the first person is guilty of a crime, you need to prove that they know what they said was untrue. Otherwise, they were just guilty of a mistake that happened to work out in their favor. But dealing with the issue of intent is always a challenge. So, it's generally considered that if you can show the statement in question is directly and it's untrue in a sense that it's completely unsubstantiated, but more desirably, that there's counter evidence that is exclusive of the claim. And in that case, you can determine the issue clearly. But the point of this is that the intent of the person can't be determined so clearly. If you have factual statements that you can show the person ought to have known, then you can adjudicate the issue correctly, even if you're not adjudicating it precisely. Usually, maybe, if you get the right jury. So, when we're talking about rights violations, the issue of metaphysical versus physical crimes becomes an important one, because there are plenty of metaphysically harmful things that people can say that don't constitute criminal action. So, it would seem that one difficulty that libertarianism faces is that it doesn't account for rights violations that aren't physical. So we can be really happy with this right to free speech and everything, and stand up for the right to free speech, but if somebody's using it to bully somebody verbally, is that non-criminal? And why is that non-criminal and the physical assault criminal? It would seem to be worse, but it's not criminal. So what's up with that? The answer, I don't know. My point being that there's the line is being drawn by libertarianism, perhaps, regarding the negative right to non-interference. It claims there's no contradictions, but that's true only on the physical level. On the metaphysical level, there's a lot of contradictions. So my freedom of speech does run afoul of your right to not be taunted as a child by peers, right? Do the peers' right to free speech outweigh my right not to be taunted? Isn't taunting a form of interference? So I would pose these questions as potential challenges to libertarianism. What I would suggest, however, is that the alternatives are not what people think they are. The alternative, people say, well, maybe we'll go with authoritarianism would be better. We just get a single strong leader. But the reality is, it's predicated on the failure to remember that it's just some guy who's got no better vision than anybody else. If we can't handle making our own decisions, why should somebody else? Why should we assume they can handle making their own decisions and ours? So there's that issue. But the point I wanted to bring up here in this was not to defend the libertarian position, but to present some ways in which libertarianism needs to grow such that it's a system that accounts for metaphysical realities that it wants to pretend don't exist. Namely, that bullying question I posed. Does it make any intuitive sense to say that the bully has the right to taunt and shame and humiliate somebody, but not to punch them? It doesn't make sense to me. So that's a problem. I'm sure there's a way to reconcile it. I just got to think about it some more. But I'm glad to have been prompted to challenge my own libertarian perspective by Zach and Hami, indicating they had. And I also want to point out that regardless of how I end up resolving this within myself, this sort of new issue to consider, I would point out that at the end of the day, most of this stuff isn't that complicated. Most of this stuff is pretty straightforward, that you get a person who's not violated any rights of anybody, has not been taunting people, and they're guilty of some sort of infraction, and they get pulled over, and you know what happens. So, I guess at the end of this video, I'd mention the following. I was driving to Alhambra this morning. I was listening to NPR, and they're talking about Dallas. And I was listening to it in the way that I normally listen to such things, which is sort of from a debate coach perspective, thinking about what the event does to the argumentation. And I thought to myself, this muddies the moral high ground. And then I started crying. And I felt really sad. And then I stopped crying. I started listening for a little bit more. And then they interviewed this police guy, and he talked about being under attack from snipers and all this military language and stuff. And then in the interview he referred to, he said, we're trying to get civilians out of the way. And I burst into tears again. Because, and I burst into tears a little bit, like a second or two after, when I thought, we aren't civilians, we're citizens. And I felt a great sadness to see what I once believed, probably falsely, but what I once believed was a citizenry that comprised a citizen democracy upon the shared values of a lack of separation between the government and the people, right? That it's not civilians and us non-civilians. That's for invading armies. It makes me really sad. It makes me really sad they shot those cops. That's not an acceptable response. It's not helping at all. It's hurting substantially. It's not. That doesn't hold them accountable. That wasn't the cop who shot that guy in Michigan or wherever it was. You're shooting the wrong person. None of those cops, as far as you know, killed anybody. None of those cops violated anybody's rights, as far as you know. It's the problem with the fucking group thing. Black Lives Matter, you hear their spokesman, they say, all lives matter and Black Lives Matter. And, of course, police lives matter. Fuck the fucking groups, alright? It's not about that. It's not about a white cop shot a black guy. It's about that guy shot that guy and he's a fucking murderer and they should throw him in fucking jail. We gotta stop making special treatment for government people as though they were our aristocrats lording over us rather than supposedly ourselves. If I can get one message across today, it's America, let's return moral agency to the individual. If I don't like something that the government's doing, I need to start thinking about which person is it that I don't like is doing what to whom. And demand of myself some specificity. We know what government actually does. It removes from individuals the moral agency of their actions and says, you're just implementing a system, nothing you can do about it, that's just your job. You're not actually harming somebody. You're not actually placing a demand upon somebody, taking from them, or whatever else. Instead, you're doing your job. That's what we have to stop. We've got to stop allowing ourselves to let some individuals deny any moral agency for their actions. That doesn't mean shooting random cops. Doesn't mean shooting anybody. It means asking the same questions I keep asking. It means making the same points I keep making. It means instead of shooting cops, make them sit down and answer questions. Well, now they've got more reason to not answer questions. Hey, we have to have tight security. We got to keep everything under wraps here because we're under siege. We're cops under siege. We're under fire. This is how you lose. You don't shoot random people. Forget, who cares if they're fucking cops, firemen, teachers, freaking waitresses. It doesn't matter. You just don't shoot random people and think you've done something. There's no group that you're attacking there. We know that police officers function as a group, and that's the problem. But you aren't attack. You can't be the problem to solve the problem. You got to be the alternative to the problem. I know it's infuriating to see this specific group of people, cops, doing it over and over and over again, and you want to blame all cops. It's a bad idea. The solution is blame each individual cop in ways that make the other cops go, uh-oh, I do that too. You say, blame him right. Well, of course he's guilty. There was no aggression on the part of the person he shot. Right, other cops? They must have rushed right over and arrested him, right? Because they're not criminals. They didn't do a crime like that, and they're in charge of law enforcement. So they must have rushed right over and arrested that cop, right? What? They still haven't made a decision about it, but he's a fucking murderer. That's how you attack the group. Attack the group by making it follow its own rules. By making them defend the indefensible. When you shoot them, they can defend anything now. And they don't view us as citizens, they view us as civilians. Well, while we did have to blow up a few civilians, is something that is a natural conclusion to draw. That's the difference between civilians and citizens. Oh, I had to kill a few of my fellow citizens. Doesn't fly. Well, unfortunately, there were a few casualties amongst the civilians. Does. I'm not a civilian. I'm a citizen.